So I think there's a lot of factors that have played into this. Coaching obviously hasn't been great at times in certain situations. Players haven't played great, but the front office hasn't been great in allowing the head coach to do his job either.
Nick, what do you think about what Troy had to say there?
With respect, Troy, I totally disagree. Oh. I think the front office's #1 job is to supply the head coach with talented players. And they have done that in Dallas. Now, they add extra noise. Those other things that I would consider, ideally, your front office provides you with great players and is seen but never heard, or never seen or heard. Like, you know what I mean? That the head coach is the only voice or face of the organization other than the quarterback, who's a default voice and face. So I get that it's not perfect, but I would sure as hell rather have the draft history and re-sign my talented players history the Cowboys have than an organization where, man, we don't never hear from the owner of the Cincinnati Bengals or recently the owner of the Miami Dolphins. They stay totally out of it. But the front office does a bad job in picking players, doesn't do a good job in retaining their talented players, and they are constantly stuck at a talent deficit. So I think Jerry and Stephen Jones are an enormous net positive for the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. You just have to deal with the noise. You disagree with me.
Well, absolutely. So, and I'll tell you why I disagree with you. Back in 2004, we had T.O. on the team. Great year. Everything went good. We went to the Super Bowl, ended up losing to the Patriots. Still hurts me to this day. The next year, we had to deal with noise. T.O. had an issue with Donovan. T.O. had an issue with the front office. And the noise, same exact team, same exact talented team that you're talking about that the Cowboys have, and we ended up 6-10. The noise is what hurt us. When you talk about the Dallas Cowboys, the noise started early on in the offseason. The Zeke contract, noise right there. You talk about Dak's contract, noise right there. The last 2 weeks, the Patriots game, you're talking about noise. The coaches are doing their football job as far as special teams. That's noise right there. Then last week, you talk about the head coach and trying to find a new head coach and you're not securing his job. That's more noise. And so as talented as this football team is, at this point with all the noise, they can't overcome that to be able to win the games, and they still have a chance to make the playoffs. So Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones, they haven't helped this team. They've supplied them a bunch of players, which is good. The noise is what continues to hurt this football team.
Completely agree with you, B-Dub. And you talked about Zeke and Dak's contracts. Another contract that was talked about a lot was Jason Garrett's contract and the fact that he was coming into this season with no years remaining on his deal. Now, most teams won't opt to go into a season with a lame duck coach. That's in part because it's important to make sure that there's the perception for the players in the locker room that the head coach, the front office, and the owner is in lockstep. And with this situation with Jason Garrett, it's clear that that's not the case, just because there's a lot of show and prove that Jason Garrett has in Jerry Jones' eyes. And so when you have the potential to question the head coach and whether or not he's going to be your guy moving forward, well, if you're the owner in that position, how do you think the players feel in that locker room? I mean, all the players in that locker room understand that the owner is the one that has final say because he signs the checks. But the owner and the head coach have to be seen as being in agreement with the decisions that are made for the football team. And it's clear right now with the Dallas Cowboys, that's not the case. Look at what happened after the Buffalo Bills game. Jason Garrett said, we're going to evaluate the kicker as well as all of the other positions on the team after those missed field goals. But then Jerry Jones comes out and says, Brett Maher is our guy. Well, I mean, what are the players supposed to do in that situation? I mean, there's a little bit of confusion in terms of who's in charge down in Dallas. And I've seen this before,
Jenna. You were one of those players.
I've seen it before.
You were in that locker room, right? Wasn't Garrett your OC at the time?
Well, he was my OC in my latter years in Dallas. But before that, I came in under Bill Parcells in 2005. In the first couple of seasons, you know, you could tell that Bill Parcells was the final say with everything. Now, Jerry Jones still had his name on the checks, but Bill Parcells was the one that was running things. But then they decided to move on from Bill Parcells. He resigned in that offseason after the 2006 playoff loss to the Seattle Seahawks. And they decided to go out and hire Jason Garrett as the offensive coordinator from Miami before they hired the head coach, Wade Phillips. So as you can understand, there's a little bit of confusion in terms of who the players are supposed to listen to. You have a 13-3 year in 2007 in Wade's first year, and everybody knows players are going to be on their best behavior the first year of a new head coach. But then that following season with the same cast of characters, you run it back and you're 8-8 and you miss the playoffs. Well, why did you underachieve? Well, you underachieved because the players didn't know who to listen to, whether it was Jason Garrett, whether it was Wade Phillips, whether it was Jerry Jones. And to me, that's the problem with the 2019 Dallas Cowboys.
NFL players need to hear one voice, and that's why you're saying the head coach as well as the owner need to be on the same page. They need one voice. You need to focus on football. That same voice that you hear every day, that has to be echoed from the owner. And that head coach, that's the one voice that you need to hear, because at the end of the day, when you're talking about your play, that's the guy that you answer to on a more regular basis than the owner.
But if you, pardon me, but if your head coach has a strong enough voice, he can communicate to the players. You're going to hear from the owner all the time. Ignore it. You're going to hear him question my job and question your job. I am the voice. You know who could do that? Bill Parcells, Joe Torre in New York with George Steinbrenner, Doc Rivers right now with Steve Ballmer with the LA Clippers. We have some flamboyant, boisterous owners either presently or historically in sports. Jimmy Johnson could deal with it. The coaches with the Dallas Cowboys in their history who have enough temerity, if you will, have enough fortitude in their and strength of their convictions can make it so their voice is the one that matters.
And it will work for a time, but look at this. Jimmy Johnson,
out.
he walked away.
4 years.
He walked away.
Yeah.
Bill Parcells walked away. There's a reason why those guys are leaving. It's because the owner wants to insert himself in football decisions, and he oversteps as far as his head coaches are concerned.
I understand that. The point that I'm trying
I think you're undervaluing the point, though, in terms of the messaging that's going to the players in the locker room.
And that's totally fair.
That's a critical factor.
And it's totally fair, and it's something I can't speak to. You know what I mean? Being a player in the locker room, as far as my coach is giving me one message, my owner's giving me another. What I think sometimes gets lost in the wash, though, and what I think gets undervalued generally when we talk about the Cowboys' power structure is the owner's #1 job, though, if he is also the GM, is to, so let me rephrase it, actually. What if Jerry Jones has been a mediocre owner in relation to the head coach, but a great general manager for the head coach? Is that fair? Like his general manager side of things, supplying the roster with talent, making sure that those talented players are happy and paid, that they are in camp, that you have enough to compete with. He's done a great job in that regard. And I would say that's the most important. If you're going to have a GM owner be the same person, the most important part of it. The other stuff is unnecessary distractions. I agree with it, but I still would rather have that than a faceless name owner who's cheap and we don't draft well on the GM side of things, and I'm always fighting an uphill battle.
An owner that doesn't draft well and is cheap, that's the worst case scenario. But if you're trying to win, you need an owner that's going to supply you. And if he's a GM, he has to supply you with quality players. Then he needs to allow the coach to do his job. The best businesses are run when they say, listen, I'm going to hire a CEO, I'm going to hire a COO that just go and do your job, and I'm going to allow you to do your job. They haven't allowed Jason Garrett to do his job. He gets questions at every game. Every single game, he gets questioned, and that can't be easy as a coach. That's what he signed up for, but some of those other coaches, they got out because of that same reason.
Yeah, I think Jerry Jones has undermined his head coach. And, Nick, I understand the way you're framing it. I just don't think it's completely fair. I don't think it has to be an owner that comes out and talks all the time and supplies his head coach with good players. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, an owner that doesn't go out and spend money on any players.
Version.
There's got to be something in the middle there. But in terms of what you're saying, the most important thing is, I mean, if the most important thing was getting the most talented players that are out there, then the most talented teams would always win. But that's not the case in the National Football League. Bill Parcells said it all the time. The best players don't always make the best team, but the best team always wins. And the best team, in part, has a lot to do with the head coach being able to have consistency in messaging, and then the ownership group empowering that head coach to make the final say when it comes to football.